Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. I've got Mickie Kennedy on here today with eReleases. Now, press releases, you don't think about those, or when you do, you think, oh man, that's $50,000. You can do a press release with his eReleases organization for a few $100s, a whole campaign for like $3,000, and that's 6 to 8 releases. And he has some great insights on this show. You really have to listen to this. It's great for Marketing 101. It actually ties into how you sell, how you grow your organization. And if you like this episode, please subscribe, please like it, please send it to your friends. But I guarantee you, you listen to this whole episode, you will learn something of value that can help you grow your business, get better known, and really get out there and be the company that you can be. So let's dive in here what Mickie has to say. Mickie, welcome to the Manage to Win podcast. And you do something that I don't know that many people do. You could take a press release and actually get coverage with it. And that's a difficult task. So do you have like a starting wow story for us that was kind of like, boom, this is why I need to listen to Mickie today?
Sure. So I started, I think, close to 30 years ago. I had graduated with a creative writing degree focused on poetry. And of course, I was going to wait tables, and I did that for a summer after graduating. And I had done that for many years part-time, and then just realizing that, full-time, it's just hard. It's hard on your joints, your back, and your psyche. I just felt like I needed to transition to a safe office job. So I got hired at a telecom research startup, and I was employee number 3. And they're like, hey, you write press releases and send them out. And they introduced me to this expensive fax machine that held like 100 numbers. And of course, the media database that they had like 150 fax numbers. So it's like, so I had to program 100 numbers, hit send, take all day. There's always faxes that don't go through, and you get these error reports. And then I have to delete all of those numbers and then, put 50 more numbers in. So it was frustrating. And I was sending these out and nothing was happening. And I mentioned it to the owner, who was a telecom attorney. And he's like, yeah, he goes, we do them, but they never do anything. Just keep at it. And I was like, oh, no, I'm wasting a day and a half here. If we're going to do this, I want to see some, results. And so I kept looking at what we were sending out, which was a lot of data. And data is generally good with the media. But we weren't really talking about stories behind the data. And so I remember we had just published Caribbean telecom traffic tables between Caribbean countries, the United States, inbound, outbound traffic. And I noticed like one country, I can't remember the name of it, but it wasn't like a popular country that most people would recognize. It had way more traffic than anybody else. And so when I peeled back the layers and figured out why, it was because 1-900 numbers were routed through that country. And that was, interesting. And so I talked about that. 1-900 numbers, for a lot of people listening who don't know what those are, they were very popular in the early 90s. You could call a 1-900 number and you would be charged to your landline phone account, like say 75 cents a minute to have a pre-recorded call of whatever your horoscope is, or you could call and speak to a live psychic. Miss Cleo was popular at some point in the 80s, or no, that was the 90s. And that was like more expensive, like $3 or $4 a minute. And so you could talk to pet experts, you name it. There was also, of course, dating and all of that, romance and things along those lines. And so I wrote about that and put the data in there, but now we had the context of a story. And I was inspired by that because I noticed a trend that even really small articles tended to follow a story arc. And when you just publish data, there's no story there. And so that first release that I sent out, Reimagined, we got picked up in the Financial Times, The Economist, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and 3 telecom trade publications, as well as like Red Herring, which was popular at the time. And so I was like, whoa, this is different. And then I was like, well,
I can really get picked up. Yeah.
And I was like,
it's sending into a black hole.
Yeah. And I just, like, let's see if I can continue to do it. And I continued to get wins, sometimes would be just like one or two places. Sometimes it'd be several. And I realized that the secret sauce was just try to imagine a busy journalist and what can you say and bring across very quickly that's going to excite them and make them want to share it with their audience. Their biggest assets are audience, and they are trying to determine, is this going to entertain or educate or ideally both, their audience. And, if you write something from like, we're trying to sell this product, it's all me, that's not taking into account, how to really bring in the audience and captivate them, with a story or something along those lines. And so I just felt really, like I was figuring it out and doing really well. And at the same time, every time I do a fax, I would get calls from journalists saying, hey, instead of faxing in the future, could you start emailing? And I was like, yes, email's good. I could create a little email list. And it was only after like a few months that all of a sudden the number of people I was faxing was less than 100. So that saved me a lot of time. I could keep those numbers programmed in the fax machine and not have to delete them and start over. And it also gave me the idea of like, emailing journalists and building my own little Rolodex. And so I spent about a year in my part-time at home and on the weekends hanging out in like bulletin boards and places online where journalists hung out. And I was able to just get journalists.
You're dating yourself now, Mickie. Bulletin boards. Come on.
It was a
you're
fun
not
time.
dating yourself beyond me, but you're dating yourself. So
yeah, people were very giving of their email addresses online. And I would say, hey, I'm putting together this Rolodex. I don't know how long it's going to be, but I'd like to send you releases. And they're like, hey, as long as it's relevant to my beat, the industry I cover, sure. And so I launched in 1998 with about 10,000 journalists in my little database.
Wow.
And I was just a matchmaker sending out releases back and forth. And over the years, PR Newswire, which is a newswire of press releases, reached out to me and said, we like what you're doing. We'd like to find a way to work together. And so they were offering a local distribution at a discount, and I wasn't really interested because, I want, my people want national media attention. And so eventually they agreed to give me a national distribution at a huge discount. Like today, for a 600-word press release, they charge over $1,700 for a national press release.
Wow.
And, you can get that through us for about a quarter of the price. So it's a huge savings going through us. Now, that being said, we can't work with big giant companies or publicly traded companies or basically companies that their salespeople would like to work with. And their threshold is you look like you could spend $10,000 to $20,000 a year with them. And my customers aren't that. These are people who, they have a couple $1,000s maybe a year or even less to spend. And so it's been a really good partnership. Today, we do over 10,000 press releases a year. And we sort of act as a co-op for small businesses and entrepreneurs and startups and, authors and everybody like that. And it really gives them access to the wire. And I'm really glad I did this because, my email distribution that I started with, it's no longer a really great way to reach journalists. Media databases have become very popular over the last couple of decades. And today you can license a database for anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 a year. And what has happened is this golf club company will get access. They'll see there's like 2,400 journalists who cover golf. They'll blast them through the database. And then the owner and the marketing people will sit down and say, okay, who else can we reach? And all of a sudden they go, bankers like to play golf. So let's send this to financial analysts. Let's send this to, people who cover, business and stuff like that. And all of a sudden their inbox is full of off-targeted press releases. A financial analyst is never going to write about golf clubs.
Yeah. So let's pause for a moment. So
Sure.
I want to go back to something you said earlier that's so important earlier in your career, and even more important now, particularly, is that you have to put yourself in the seat of the person who's going to cover your press release, who's going to write about it or invite your people to do an interview, whatever it might be. Do you find that people really struggle to do that because they're just in a rush to talk about themselves or their product?
Yes. I mean, one of the most popular press releases we get is a product launch press release. And it's usually, here's the product, here's a list of features, here's a link to buy or learn more. And it's like, that's not much of a story for a journalist. And, one of the easiest things you can do in those cases is incorporate a use case study. Someone beta tested this, I'm certain. And what was their, take a favorable experience someone had and share it, give the context. Let's say you have a logistics software solution, and this company that...
Well, can you give me a real story, somebody that you helped that was going to go out and do this, and then you gave them this advice of use a case study or user whatever example, and then they actually did this. Can you...
Yeah, I mean, there's lots...
A real one.
Okay, so there is a company that actually has a product that was reaching grocery store shelves. It's called Brownie Brittle, and I think it was Gloria, somebody who put it out. And it was just like, here's the new product and everything like that. And I was just like, you need to have a story in there. It's not just a launch and availability, but what is it, that you can incorporate? And in their case, there's not a use case study like, Ed loves to eat these or something like that. But there's the origin story. It's like, who is, this, I think it was Sheila G maybe, tell us about her, tell us about the story. And it, it's like, she used to make brownies and people loved the edges, she noticed. And she's like, I wonder if I could make that like into a brittle. And it's got the chewiness and the crunch of the edges of brownies, and it became a product. And, sharing those sort of origin stories is important. I mean, there's a reason that everybody that comes out on the Shark Tank they don't open with their numbers and just talk about the financial opportunity. They share a vulnerability. Like, I got laid off and I decided to just take my entire 401k and go all in with this idea that I've just had in the back of my mind that I've always wanted to develop. Or I lost my dad and we used to have this little hobby product that we sold at yard sales. And I just said, I feel like there could be a business there. And what that does is it really gets to the human interest element. It gets us caring. People don't want to buy from companies. They want to buy from people. And that human interest element is so important to bridge that. And so in that case, with I think it was the Brownie Brittle, it was incorporating the origin story, getting, what was unique about that person's journey, because people like journeys. People want to support people. And what I find is a lot of small businesses don't learn from startups. Startups admittedly will say, we're small. Right now, we're just two people, or we're working out of Ed's garage. But a lot of small business owners want to appear that they're Microsoft, that they're bigger than they are. They are like, oh, well, we don't have a media contact, so I'll make up someone's name and put there. So when someone calls and asks for this person, I can pretend I'm them, not the president of the company who is also the only employee. And I'm just like, no.
So now, let me ask you, you said that the press releases, or at least you didn't say the press release. You said your database really is not the way to go to have your own database now. What is it, PR Newswire? Is that what it is?
Yeah. So in the United States, there's basically a duopoly of press release newswires. There's Business Wire and PR Newswire. There was a third one, but it's kind of pivoted away from reaching journalists. And now it's just like, hey, meet SEC disclosure requirements and don't pay as much. And do you really want journalists looking too carefully at your press releases? And so it really is a duopoly. And the reason that it went from 3 to 2 is largely because journalists are busy. The number of articles that the average journalist is expected to write today is double what it was maybe 10 years ago, because newspapers are not doing well financially. Craigslist destroyed the classified ad industry. And now the Indeed and all these other places have really, destroyed the job postings, which was the bread and butter for a lot of these newspapers. And so it really has changed the landscape. And so journalists aren't making as much. They don't have as much time to devote to investigative reporting. So they're just trying to fill the void and get content out. And for that reason, with their inbox overwhelmed, especially for national media, with so many off-targeted emails, they're going to the newswire. And the great thing about the newswire is when you log in as a journalist, you can see just your industry feed, and you can even customize it, exclude certain keywords, include certain keywords. So it's the opposite of their inbox. It's relevant press releases for them and the industries that they cover.
And can they exclude certain people or companies? Yeah.
If you can turn that into a keyword, like I don't want to ever write about Microsoft, yeah, you can put that word in and you won't see those press releases. And you can do the same thing with, like, let's say you cover fashion, but you don't cover high fashion. So there's certain keywords and brand names that I'm never going to write a press release about this company that sells $250,000 gowns and things like that. So you can really customize it and make it so that it is so the opposite of your email inbox. And that's the real value of it. The downside of a duopoly is it's very expensive. They understand that and they charge a premium. But the good news for us is we have this relationship with PR Newswire where we sort of are able to get people a much lower rate to a national distribution over that wire.
Yeah. Now you mentioned the story aspect, but it also seems to me if I've got that many emails, or if I'm not looking at email, I'm just looking at my list, my industry, it seems like you've got to be really good at subject lines or headlines for the release, right? So can you give me an example or two or three of, a client brought us this headline, too long, unspecific, whatever it is, and then we created it and we changed it to this headline, and here's the result we had.
Right. So I had somebody come through and they compared themselves as the Amazon of, I forget, like gaskets and seals or something like that. And I was like, well, it's kind of hard to bridge what you are, and stuff like that. The best headlines, and what I recommend with him, is be more contextual and less sensational. A lot of people try to write headlines as if they're writing them for the end users, what the article would have. So you see a lot of puns. If you're familiar with the New York Post, they always have lots of puns in them and they're clever, but you always can't tell what the headline is. It draws you in and then you want to read more, but because you don't know what they're talking about, and so that doesn't work with journalists. Journalists, when they stream headlines, they're trying to determine, is this relevant for me? And should I drill down and read the whole press release? And so for that reason, the best headlines is, in that case, it was EPM Inc. develops e-commerce platform for seals, gaskets in oil industry, automotive industry, and blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden, someone who's reading that goes, oh, I cover the oil industry. I cover, I can tell that this is relevant for me. Where before, it was just the Amazon of seals and gaskets. It's like, it's just the animal seals. Well, probably not with the gaskets there as well, but it wasn't as clear of the industries that were represented. And really the best headlines and press releases over the wire are generally the ones that are not fancy. They just are able to get across a lot of information that makes a journalist feel very comfortable. Yeah, this is my industry. This is something that's of interest to me.
So that headline is a long one. Do you find the long headlines work the best when
yes,
you're
absolutely.
In the release? Okay.
Absolutely. Short headlines fail. This is not email marketing where, something that sort of gets people thinking, what is this? To click through. Journalists don't. They don't have time to. They've been desensitized to that. They've been burned so many times clicking on it to figure out what is this about, and then it's not relevant. And so they want to see all of the relevance there. And now that being said, you can have a headline that's too long. I think that, generally 120 characters or less is probably ideal. Maybe 100, think about like a tweet, 140 characters or something like that. But I do say that if it takes a little bit more to get everything in there, I would rather go longer than shorter. Is going to give you a better service. I also know a lot of people do subheads. The thing is, on the wire, you only see the subhead when you drill down. And so it might be fine to, I don't think it hurts you to add a subhead, but I don't think it's a huge advantage. And, if you're toying between what's the most important part, and make sure that's in the headline, and you can certainly put anything secondary in a subhead.
Can you give me some other examples of headlines that you remember as some of your favorites for, the results that they brought in?
can do a quick check.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Because I'm curious. I find that in myself and the audience, we're learning. We don't understand your craft. And I hope that most of us are wise enough to realize that it's going to be difficult for us to master your craft, even with AI. So it's best to, if we want to try this type of thing, then probably engage someone on your team. But I always like examples.
Sure.
That helps people understand, oh, wow, I wouldn't have thought of that.
Right. So here's one. During the pandemic, we did a press release for the Dining Bond Initiative, and they named it after the War Bond Initiative. And it was basically a volunteer kind of effort to help restaurants that were closed during the pandemic. And basically, you have a favorite restaurant, you've been sent home for 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and there's no money yet flowing to restaurants, and they all got closed. It's like, it was a way to nominate your favorite local restaurant. If the volunteers were able to get in touch with the owners, you could make a donation that went directly to them, and it'd be backed by a gift certificate, dining bond type of thing. You take a chance that they're still going to be there, but if you had the favorite restaurant that you and your spouse would go to on anniversaries, as a little way you could support. And it did phenomenal. I mean, it got picked up.
So what was the headline, or what was the statement?
So his Dining Bond Initiative sweeps the global restaurant community to help restaurants during the pandemic. And, it's a little on the longer side, but it addresses the restaurant community and what they're doing, helping restaurants during the pandemic. And so, it did really well. I mean, we got picked up. The big ones I have on my website as a case study: Harvard Business Review, CNN, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Reuters, Fox Business News, Taste, James Beard Foundation, Wine and Spirits Magazine, and I think over 100 daily papers. I mean, we actually quit counting because it just seemed like there were so many small little papers across the U.S. and it generated millions of dollars in money that went to restaurants. So it was a huge success. And all of that was created by just hitting send through a press release newswire once. And so that's the real value of having something extremely newsworthy and communicating it, because if it is extremely newsworthy, it goes really big and to a lot of different places. And the first thing I want to point out is all the places that I mentioned, Taste and Reuters and Bloomberg and Forbes, these are not the press release on these sites. This is an article that a journalist at that outlet wrote based on the information in the press release. There is something that happens with press releases called syndication, where the press release gets replicated on sites or sections of websites. And I always tell people that is, sort of a distraction. And there's a whole cottage industry out there of companies that only do that. They don't reach journalists. They just put the press release on a bunch of different websites. But if you went to that website and did a search for that press release, you wouldn't find it, because it is literally in many cases a subdomain or just a section of the website that's not part of their natural website. And, so these are original articles that journalists wrote, and, all the papers as well. Some of the exceptions are...
You use this long headline.
Mm-hmm.
So 100 to 140 characters, if I heard you correctly, sometimes longer. And so the journalist, who's totally strapped for time, can understand whether they think it's of value or not. And if you know your audience well enough, you should be able to do that with some guidance. So if somebody works with you, Mickie, or your team, what's the process that they go through? I mean, do typically people try one press release and they work with you to kind of tailor it and see how it goes? Or are they coming in? Does it typically take 3 to see whether this is going to be a successful thing for us? Or what's the process typically?
Most of our customers are one and dones. And as soon as...
I appreciate your candor.
As soon as it's not a slam dunk, they move on to the next shiny object. Maybe it's Pinterest today or TikTok. So, but the people that do well and consistently get media pickup are the ones that do consistent press releases. A PR campaign is usually 6 to 8 press releases. And I try to get people to look at going in and doing a variety of 6 to 8 newsworthy press releases. And admittedly, in the average campaign of 6 to 8 releases, only 2 or 3 generally get earned media. And that is if you are also trying to do strategic newsworthy types of press releases. And so the sad reality is, I would say of the press releases that do go through a wire, like Business Wire and PR Newswire, 97% of them do not generate any earned media. And so it sounds discouraging, but the thing that I have is education. And so one of the things I try to do is educate my leads and my customers that, hey, you are doing press releases that you see other people in your industry do, new hire press release. You see a product launch press release that's written, here's the product, here's a list of features. And what I'm telling you is you should take that press release and incorporate a use case study. This is someone who was experiencing this. They used it. This was the outcome. Here's a quote by them talking about it. All of a sudden, that a journalist can easily envision that as a story and follows a story arc. And they know that their audience is going to come along for the ride of like, this is a new product or service, but hey, here's somebody that had this big transformative moment because they were able to use it. And this is a quote by them talking about something, how easy it was to use or the results that they achieved, something like that. And that's going to excite them considerably more. And so
do the journalists ever look at that and they say, hey, I really like this story, but I know that, other outlets may be picking up on this identical story. Do you have another example?
I don't think they cared. I don't think the Wall Street Journal cared that CNN picked up.
As a matter of fact, maybe it reinforces the credibility or the validity of...
in that case, you didn't have Forbes or these other Harvard Business Review saying, oh, Wall Street Journal already covered it or Fox Business already covered, they beat us to it. The truth is, the people at Harvard Business Review that read it aren't necessarily the same audience that's going to read Fox Business or Bloomberg. And so, I think that one place breaking a story doesn't necessarily mean that it's a problem somewhere else. Now, there are these aha investigative moments where the first person to launch the story is going to get a lot of cachet and a lot of recognition. And it does make some of the other more outlets apprehensive about covering it because it may seem like they're just riding the coattails. But when it comes to just regular news, and especially with news from companies, that doesn't really come into play. So that's not really, much of a concern. And other things to keep in mind is, the personnel change press releases that we get a lot of. No one really cares that you have a new associate of HR. You send that to your local newspaper, headshot, don't even write a press release, just a little bit of a bio and talk about how they joined the company. You can do the same thing with a trade publication. They usually have an on the move section and an email address or an upload, and just do that. Save your money. Don't send that over a wire. But, do more meaningful, newsworthy press releases. Those are the ones that you should be sending over the wire. And releases that are strategic and newsworthy, these are the 3% of the press releases that do get picked up. And there's lots of patterns there.
So what type of pattern is there that we should be aware of?
There is the story arc, taking things that normally you would just issue and adding the story elements to it, the product launch, incorporate a use case study. If you're doing a company launch, incorporate your journey. Think about Shark Tank. What is it you can talk about that'll really break through and get people to care and come along for the human interest element? There's a concept that became popular, I think over 10 years ago, called newsjacking that worked for like 10 minutes. And it's still being widely followed. And it's like, if there's a big story in the news, join the fro. I remember one client came to me who was a security consultancy, and it was after the Target credit card breach years ago. And they said, hey, I want to do a press release about that. And I was like, yeah, that's newsjacking. He goes, yeah, exactly. And I said, that doesn't work anymore. He goes, show me why. So I showed him on PR Newswire and Business Wire. I was able to find 1,400 press releases from other security consultants with their opinion about the Target credit card breach. And I said, how many stories do you think are about the Target card breach? I don't know, 100. I was like, let's say there's 250. Now it's 1,400 people competing for that. It's not going to do very well. So in cases like that, if you have a contrarian viewpoint, that's where you could do really well, because of those 150 to 200 stories that get written, every journalist wants to be fair and balanced. So they want to cover both sides. If everybody in the entire world is saying the same thing, be the person who raises their hand and says the exact opposite. If everybody else is saying, you should lock down this, you should check this, you should do that, whatever, and you're the person that raises their hand and says, hey, if you're a mom and pop business, you have a credit card terminal on your counter, you have zero things to worry about credit card breach. You're not holding the numbers. You're not writing them down. You're using a big, giant, multi-billion-dollar company that's in charge of handling that and storing that. Zero responsibility for you. It's like, well, that's different, And I can see the contrarian getting a bit of information and getting the opportunity to be plugged into some of those articles. They're not going to be in every article, 150, but there's the potential they could be in a dozen or two.
Particularly if they get it out quickly.
Correct.
Now, one thing you said earlier was that people should be prepared to invest in a 6 to 8 press release campaign. And what time frame does that cover?
So small businesses may not have newsworthy events every month. So it could be every other month. I tell people try to strive to do it at least quarterly. So to do 6 to 8 releases might take you a year and a half to 2 years. Might take you as little as a year or less. I have one company in the past that would do 30 to 35 press releases a year, but they were doing industry surveys for a lot of different vertical markets. And so they had a big newsworthy announcement. And that is the one type of press release in my education that I said anybody can do, and it will 100% get you earned media every single time. And that is, do a survey of your industry right now. Ask relevant questions that nobody else is reporting on. If there's something that you would love to be at a trade show or conference right now, to ask your colleagues, hey, have you noticed lately that everybody's taken like these 30 days, net 30 is now like net 90, everybody's slow paying. Could be a sign that there's, economic uncertainty in your industry or the nation or something like that. If there's other things that are going on in your industry that people complain about or have fears about, but it's not yet really gone big in the media, like, maybe it's AI concerns, like people are like, you could ask questions around that. But, the thing is, brainstorm lots of intriguing questions that people might want to know the answer to, and then create I use SurveyMonkey. I like 4 questions per page because it seems like little micro commitments. And so I usually do 3 to 4 pages, so 12 to 16 questions. As you get farther into the survey, you can have some weird questions, like I put like on the last page, usually my left field questions that, just brainstorm stuff that's kind of like out there. And one that comes to mind is we had an automotive center in Pennsylvania that their only goal was to get links from auto trade magazines and trade publications. And so I told them, you're not newsworthy at all. The only way I think you can do this is to do a survey. And on the last page, we asked, what's the strangest thing a customer left in their car while being repaired? And it was just an open field. And we took that link, and you don't need a database or a Rolodex for these surveys. Just research trade associations, independent or small ones in your industry, and they're out there. Everybody knows the big ones. Like in public relations, there's Public Relations Society of America. Don't go to them. They're too big. They won't cooperate with you. The smaller ones that no one knows about, and they're out there. Like in the PR world, I had someone challenge me saying, well, Mickie, there's no one else out there. And I told her, I said, there's over 700 other trade associations for PR and public relations in the United States alone. Some of them are very small, like Florida PR firms or Mid-Atlantic. There's some that are like, Asian American PR firms. But, one that I found that worked really well was PR firms of 50 employees or less. And, that's most PR firms, but I think it had like 1,500 members. And what you do is you just take that link to the survey and you go, hey, I'm doing a survey in our industry. Here's a link to it. If you could send this out to your members, we're looking to get at least 100 responses for it to be statistically relevant. In exchange for doing this, we'll mention you in the press release we'll be issuing over PR Newswire in the coming weeks. They see this as an opportunity for them to get mentioned in articles as well. And it excites them because nobody knows about them. And they see the big associations getting all the love in the media. And so about 2/3 of the time, the first association we reach out to says yes. Then they'll send it to their members. You analyze it, figure out what's going to be the most shocking or surprising result. And really make that the focus of the press release. Now, do build out a page on your website where you put all the questions and answers, but really make the press release one, at most two of the questions, but link to the others, because resourceful journalists will go and look at the other questions and they might resonate with question 7 because they know, something very particular. And then they write an article about that. And sometimes I've seen where we do a press release, we get 4 or 5 articles, and then we also get an article where someone used a different question. And I'm like, maybe you might want to consider writing a press release using that question. And then we do that and get another 4 or 5 articles or more. Generally, the minimum we get when we do this is 4 articles, 4 original articles, earned media, relevant to your industry. And it can be 14 to 20 articles. The company that did 30 plus press releases each year that were doing all the micro vertical surveys, on average, they got between 14 and 20 articles every time they did that. And what happened to them is after a few years, the media would contact them. There's a consolidation, like 2 companies joining forces and combining. We want your reaction to that because you cover that vertical, that industry, and you're recognized as a thought leader and an expert in that industry because you do the survey. And so that does extremely well, and that's extremely newsworthy, and anybody can do it. In the case of the automotive place, that question, what was the strangest thing you left in your car? No statistical relevance. We took and curated like 20 of the strange little things that people left in their car and put that in the press release. But we linked to all the questions and answers. And we also included, I think, the whole roundup of responses from people. That one did extremely well. I think they got picked up in over a dozen trade publications, their local newspaper, their local magazine. It was a consumer magazine. And I would say more than 8 of the automotive verticals that picked it up linked to their page on their website, which helped their SEO. They had lost their domain name because it was tied to the Yellow Pages. And I don't know, maybe they stopped advertising or Yellow Pages no longer support it, but they couldn't get their domain back. And because they never really owned it. And so they launched a new one, and they were like, what's the easiest way to get authority? And it's to get links from automotive, their industry, automotive trade publications. Yeah, and that worked extremely well.
So Mickie, it strikes me as though you've got some people who don't have a clue what to do, and they're like, help me, I need everything done A to Z. You get some people in the middle who are like, I need some help. Like, we get the concept, we can draft it, we need feedback. And then you got other people who have some experience, they've had some success, and they're going to pretty much ride on their own and just use your tool.
Sure.
How do you support each one of these types of entities, people?
Right. So when it comes to those who are just on their own, they just come and use us like we're a platform and distribute releases and save a lot of money. Then there's those that need the writing, and so we'll work with them to write the press release. When it comes to the bigger stuff like the survey and stuff like that, we do not do the survey, but occasionally I will offer small groups where I can provide support to people on Zoom, brainstorm with them, and sort of help them along the process. And I do have free education where I help people on as to what strategic types of press releases they should be doing, like the survey, and sort of break it down for them. And for anybody that's interested in that, it's a good place to start. It's at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN, and there's no charge. It's a video with some accompanying material. The video is less than an hour long because I didn't want it to be like a 14-hour course that you had to drudge through. I wanted to break it down and just talk about the types of releases they should be focusing on. And all of these are in that 3% of press releases that do get picked up. And what I find is the people that go through that class and start brainstorming the types of releases that are appropriate for them, using those and do those type of, they have more success than everybody else. Now, again, it's not a campaign of 6 to 8 releases, it's usually 2 or 3 that do really well. And, but that being said, I've had clients where one hit, is so successful. There was a company that makes waste management facilities, and they do nuts and bolts everything. They basically can come into a city that has no presence, and they're building out a waste management facility. They handle everything, including the recycling, everything, all the mechanics of it. And it's not cheap. And, they did a press release basically talking about what they do. And it got picked up in Waste Management News, which is like their trade publication. No big surprise there. But the big surprise for them was they got a call from Australia and said, hey, can you do this internationally? And they said, yeah, we do this routinely, where we put it all on barges and ship it overseas. And we have people there that can put it all together and all of a sudden give you a facility. 3 facilities were set up in Australia. I think it was over $40 million in business from just one $350 press release. And so, if you hit the right audience, it really only takes, one hit to really make a huge difference. And, the type of things that happens is when people read earned media, they don't get that shutdown that happens when they see an ad. They usually get excited. There's a signal of trust. When a journalist chooses to write about you, it's almost like social proof or an implied endorsement. And so people get excited about it. They want to do business with you. I'm guilty of this. I've seen blog posts and articles about a Kickstarter campaign, and it's like, I'm not really needing this product, but I've seen their frustration in the article about how they just wanted someone else to adapt a product to just fit this niche, and no one did. And so finally they had to dig in and find somebody to make a die and produce it in China and all this stuff. And you're like, okay, I'm going to, back them. It's $45. Why not? And that happens because we have this emotional response. We naturally want to care and support other people, especially people who are facing challenges and setbacks. And so, that happens with articles. And the customers you get from articles generally are going to be the most loyal and the least likely to price shop. They want to do business with you. They don't want to go to Amazon or elsewhere and see if they can find this cheaper. They want to do business with this company they read about, and they want to support this person and their journey. And so that makes perfect sense.
So you've got this free plan on eReleases.com, right?
Correct.
And there's other materials there that people can look at.
Yep.
To get an idea. It's all free. They have nothing to lose. And, breaking through, normally when you think of a press campaign, you're thinking $5,000, $10,000, $25,000, $100,000. So you have a cost-effective way, with or without some guidance, to go and test this and also be challenged on putting yourself in your customer's seat and what is the why there, telling a story. It all adds up,
Yeah. And
I'll probably come try this in the next 6 to 12 months. I mean, why not?
You could do a campaign of 6 to 8 releases for under $3,000 with us. We have a new customer special rate that you can lock in with a package purchase. Like I said, it could take you a year and a half to do 6 to 8 releases. And so just find a rhythm that works for you. Don't get diverted by some other shiny object. Remain committed. It's funny. Sometimes you find lightning strikes again and again. In the case of that company that does the surveys, they started 5 years ago sort of just testing different releases and then said, let's just test a survey. And they did it, and it worked really well to the point that they were able to just do that annually and do that across 30 some different markets, verticals. And so wow. It's very repetitive, but each time it works, because what happens is they're really good at asking the questions that people want to know the answer to right now, today. Some of the recent questions were like, coming out of the pandemic, workplace culture's changing, and are you having challenges there? People not wanting to come back into the office. Is AI a threat to your, a fear among your staff? Things around that people might want to know the answer to. Just talk to others, brainstorm. If you get the right questions, a lot of people want to know the answer. And that's a very valuable resource where you rise to the top, because you doing a survey really puts you out there as an expert and a perceived authority in your industry.
Love it. Love it. So people should go to eReleases.com. Anything else you want to tell them to check out, Mickie, because you've been doing this a long time?
Yeah, I think the best place to go is that free masterclass at eReleases.com/plan. But also you'll notice in the footer of our website, on no matter what page you're on, there's a new customer special link, and you can do a press release for $349 and also get a package of releases at that cost. And when it comes to writing, I am now telling people, try to do it yourself. You can lean on AI, but never go to AI and let them choose what to write about, ChatGPT or any of these places. They have been trained on the 97% of press releases that fail to get earned to media. So you always approach it with these strategic press release ideas that you'll learn about in the masterclass. And the best results I get is where you say, okay, I have this press release I want to write about my company, and here's exactly the topic that I want to write about, and here's some information about my company and the website. How would you structure this press release? And then it gives you the structure. And then say, okay, give me 10 headline versions for this press release. And then pick one. And if, look at the who, what, when, where, how, and why. Are the most important elements of that addressed in the headline? They don't all have to be addressed in the headline. Usually the opening paragraph, definitely. But is there something missing in the headline? And then focus on, give me 3 opening paragraphs. And again, make sure the who, what, when, where, how, and why is addressed there. And then say, okay, give me the next paragraph. One area I'd recommend you spend a lot of time on is a quote. An amazing quote in a press release can almost, in cases where you have a press release that isn't extremely newsworthy, you can rise to the top and journalists will choose you if you have an amazing quote. Because if a journalist is looking at 2 mediocre press releases and they know that they can do a story on either one, but one has an amazing quote, they know when they're done with that article, that amazing quote is going to be like a stamp of pride there, and it's going to really resonate and carry the article. Where if the other one just has a safe quote, the quotes that look like they've just been written by committee and they don't say anything very strong, it's not going to stand out. So they will definitely choose yours. What makes an amazing quote? It could be your wordsmith, but I also recognize most people didn't go to a creative writing program like me. So, strong active verbs, saying something very concise and succinct and powerful. If they were to paraphrase that sentence or at maximum 2 sentences in your quote, if they paraphrase it, someone who had read the previous quote would say, oh, he said it much better. I liked how it was. That's a good measure that you've written a pretty decent quote. And so, again, active verbs do well. A contrarian quote also does really well, where you just stand counter to everybody else, can do really well. But if you take that approach to AI, I don't have a problem with using it because the end product is an original article written by a journalist. You just have to make sure that what is written by AI is accurate. There's just not making stuff up that's factually inaccurate, and that you're comfortable with what's written there.
Yeah, my experience with AI is I actually like to write something first, and then I look at it and I'm like, it's either too bland or I need to beef up this or beef up, and then give very specific instructions to the AI of here's what I wrote, here's the target audience, here's what I'm trying to reach, here's what I'm trying to do. And like what you said, quite frankly, if I let AI write too much, it's just picking up all kinds of trash on the internet, and it will bring back things that are not true.
Yeah, and if you ask
it'll bring
AI to write
comments as a quote, as factual, and they're not; they're opinions.
I find that when AI writes an entire press release, it's that type of writing that's written by committee. It's safe, it's nothing inaccurate, but it's not strong writing. And so I find having it have a mission for each paragraph and giving you options is a better way to sort of tease out stronger copy, more focus, and really bridge piece by piece.
Yeah, and I remember in high school journalism, which was quite a long time ago, I'm going to my 50-year reunion in another couple of months. My journalism teacher told us that the first paragraph is no more than 25 to 30 words, and it reinforces your headline. And then the next paragraph then reinforces that, and then you got kind of the body, and then you close with a strong hook or whatever. But I don't know whether that's changed at all, but I'll never forget that.
It's very similar. And that's another thing to think about is what's the goal of the press release? What's the hook? We know we want it to be turned into an article, but, sometimes do you want to just get people to your website, or do you want to actually get people to buy? And sometimes having that into the thought is where you can lead people. For example, if you really just want to educate people, getting them and ending with a white paper is something that could work really well. Journalists don't always support pointing to a website or showcasing something like that, but some do. And so
they would on a survey result.
Absolutely.
If you click here to get a copy of the survey results,
correct.
Then that would work. Yeah. So, all right. So, Mickie, this is great, and I want to encourage the audience that if you like this episode, how could you not like this episode? If you like this episode, you got to pass it on to other people. This is really good information for anybody who's trying to attract new business or reinforce to others, hey, we're a leader, or we're good at what we do, or we're touching these people's lives, whatever it might be, to master how to do press releases. So please pass this on to other people. Like this episode, subscribe. And Mickie, thank you so much for coming on and being so candid about what people can do.